Welcome aboard, everybody, on our research group's first maiden voyage into this new field for us, at least, energy efficiency at sea, and especially the human factors which we need to understand to develop technical solutions. So one question just for everybody to think about quickly: how many ships are there worldwide? How many merchant ships are there worldwide? And if you answered 50,000, you're correct. If your number was higher, don't be sad. With growing globalization and the interconnectedness of global markets, there will be more ships, there will be bigger ships. And while they might not all look like this, at the moment around 3% of global carbon emissions come from shipping, 15% of nitric oxide, sulfuric oxide, so other very potent greenhouse gases come from the shipping industry. And this is something which the International Maritime Organization has clearly identified and implemented policies to counteract. For example, the carbon intensity indicator, which rates a ship on its carbon emissions per tonnage transported. But at the same time, there's a bit of a discrepancy between what we can expect to save in carbon emissions and what actually is happening. And we call this the energy efficiency gap. For us psychologists to close this energy efficiency gap, we need to get our famous function here. Energy efficiency is technical potential times human behavior. So what I want to do now in the next few minutes is present our first study of the user requirements, the context in which we're working when we want to develop technical systems for energy efficiency on board. And we did this by conducting a mixed methods study. I went on board of a ship for a week or thereabout, conducted interviews with the entire crew, and then afterwards we validated the data once again in an online survey. So let's go into detail with these interviews. Like I said, I interviewed the entire crew, well, except for the cook, but we gathered around 11 hours worth of data with many questions on what are specific energy efficient operations which they conducted. They asked them to describe it on a business process model and notation, so we can really structure this discussion and talk about what motivates and hinders them. Afterwards, we analyzed this with Brown and Clark's thematic analysis and used a more data theory, a data-driven approach, looking for patterns in the data and on a semantic level, so no real deep interpretations of what has been said. In the end, we have 4 themes. We identified four themes, or we developed 4 themes, which I will now present to you quickly. First one we found was stress, and this had 3 components or subcodes. We have, for example, safety, having lots of thoughts on the safety of the crew, the ship itself, the environment, and the cargo. Workload in the sense of, okay, I have multiple tasks at once which I have to complete, but at the same time also I'm working in a shift system, so there's fatigue, which is something which has to be considered with any system. And of course there's also uncertainty. One kind of uncertainty which was often mentioned was, if I want to plan an energy efficient voyage, that's great, but if the port calls me and says, oh no, your schedule has been changed, you have to travel a lot faster now, there's less of an ability to be predictive in driving, and that hampers situation awareness, for example. That's the same one. In the second theme, motivators, we found that a company was a big motivator, so the financial success, the commercial success of my employer, the shipping company, is something which also benefits me because it gives me job security. Environment was another motivator, concerns for the environment, but also secondary benefits. So, for example, Keeping the engine in a good condition is very good for the fuel conversion rate, for fuel into the distance traveled, but it also improves its robustness. For example, during bad weather, you don't want your engine to fail, and the more well maintained your engine is, the less likely that is to happen. In regards to influence, maybe just like one quick context excurse. We have the ship, which is the main stakeholder which we're talking about here, but there are also external stakeholders, and the two biggest ones we have is, for one, the charterer. The charterer is the person who owns the cargo, or the persons. There's usually quite a few charterers paying a ship to transport cargo, and we have the shipping company. The shipping company is the person, or is the group, which owns the ship and which employs usually the seafarers. And what we have here in this situation, the charterer and the shipping company, is a principal agent problem. So we have the charterer who pays for the fuel, but the owner who pays for the repairs or the maintenance of the ship, and also the charterer who has influence on the scheduling. So if we're looking for example, the carbon intensity indicator, which we talked about, the charterer has a big influence on this indicator, but at the same time, it's the shipping company which has then to take this, who has to wear that badge, but may not actually be responsible for it. That was one important theme. Another theme was strategies. So we asked here, like for the participants, to mention the themes, we mentioned the strategies to be energy efficient, and just to give you an indication of how inefficient the most mentioned theme is, reduce usage of appliances or lights. A ship measures its fuel in tons, so just imagine how long these lights could be used on 1 ton of heavy fuel oil. You know? So it's not really efficient, but it's actually very interesting because it may be an indication that the crew is using mental models of the energy efficiency at home and applying it to this workplace. The second most mentioned one, reducing speed, that's actually a very good strategy. That's also called slow steaming, and there's lots of research on how it works because, of course, fuel consumption is a quadratic equation of speed. But that's another story. So that's the qualitative, the rich data we gathered from the interviews, and now we took this information and asked a more quantitative approach to get more diversity in the sample. And we did this by recruiting 74 people, for example, from online groups such as from Facebook or from Reddit, and we also recruited some cadets from the University of Flensburg, a beautiful city, by the way, not as beautiful as Lübeck, but still it's got its advantages. And we took the cadets who had just had their 1 semester internship and were just finishing up their bachelor or their licensing. And altogether, not yet, but what we did was we took from these 2 things which I just presented earlier, motivators and influence, and we asked the participants to rate how much the hindering and motivating factors were actually hindering or motivating, and then we asked them to rate the perceived influence of the different stakeholders. And let's start with the influence. I'm not going to go into detail of the entire results, just like the main takeaways. What we have is, first of all, that individuals rated their own influence a lot less than groups as a whole. So for example, if I'm a navigator and I plan the voyages, I myself might rate my influence as a lot lower than, for example, the deck department as a whole, so all of my other colleagues and their influence as a combined force. Secondly, we have the very high rating of the external stakeholders, so the people who are onshore, not at sea, the shipping company, the charterer, the port, rated very highly in their influence on energy efficiency operations. And then finally, what we have is that the highest rated, or the at this side again, the ship master, that is the captain of the ship, was rated having a very high influence on energy efficient operations. Why is this interesting? Because the literature actually shows that that's not really the case. The master is very dependent on orders coming from shore, and it's dependent on many factors, but it's definitely not. It's actually quite a bit of a surprise here that the perception of the influence of the master is so high, when in reality it's a bit shaky. Okay, that's the influence. Let's go to the motivators. First thing that we find is that concerns for environment were rated the strongest motivator. However, this could be something just like the social desirable answer. Second of all, conflicting orders was rated a high, like a very great hindrance. So what does that mean? Like, there's a conflicting order. It's, for example, the charter says, okay, the schedule says you have to travel really fast, and at the same time you have the standing order of the shipping company which says, hey, we want to do slow steaming, we want to have energy efficiency. That causes a hindrance in energy efficient operations. Missing knowledge was also rated a hindrance. However, and this is actually quite interesting, the engine department, so engine department is the people on the deck shoveling coal into the machines, at least that's what it was in the last century. Now it's a very high technical field with lots of technical expertise, which makes sense that around 50% of the participants from the engine department said missing knowledge was actually not a hindrance at all. So there's quite a lot of potential for strategy knowledge, at least perceived strategy knowledge from that department. Here just one little analysis that we did on top. We took these 8 factors from motivation, and we tried to find a structure of the factors underlying this. We found a 3-factor solution which explained around 60% of the variance. Just to get a bit, just to get like a bit of a context of an overview of these of the 3-factor solution. We found that the environment and the shipping company as one factor, so supportive orders, having the financial security of the shipping company and the commercial success of them, as well as the environmental concerns. The second factor, stress, perceived from safety concerns, conflicting orders, but also then the final factor, expertise, missing knowledge, and then the decreased workload. So what we can do with this, and now I'm just going a bit already into the discussion, but this could be quite interesting. But if we just play around a bit, we can actually see some, or we could postulate some relation to, for example, the basic psychological needs mini theory of self-determination theory, where we could say, okay, we have relatedness, which has we have relatedness because we have here the wish to support and be taken care of, and to take care of other social groups. We have the autonomy, so these constraints, that having a wish to not be constrained by them is a wish for autonomy, and of course expertise and competence, being able to have knowledge and use that knowledge. So I'm going to hurry up because I only have 1 minute left. Just a quick summary. We found strategies. There's lots of potential to increase strategy knowledge, and especially to work against false beliefs. And we also have the possibility to develop team mental models, for example, with a tool which shows, like, for example, maintenance scheduling, where we can show, okay, you as an individual, you have made this contribution to the energy efficiency of the ship as a whole. In regards to influence, we have maybe a potential problem coming in the future, or right now, of like an internalization or externalization of control. Either the ship has power, or everything is run externally by the shipping company or the charterer, and that's why it's also important not just to think of the human-machine interaction, so the crew with the tool that we're developing, but also the machine-environment interaction. How does our tool communicate transparently to stakeholders on shore? And finally, the 3-factor solution, which I showed you for basic psychological needs, could be a good diagnostic tool, or could be like, or should inform our development of this energy efficiency operations tool. Yeah, I think we've run out of time, so I'll leave it at that. There's definitely some limitations. It was an explorative study. If you want to know more, check out our website on Maridata, our project. It's lots of interesting stuff, and it's a really cool project. I'm really glad to work there, and I hope I can have the opportunity to show you more about that, and thank you very much for your attention.